Welcome to The Spawn Chunks, episode number 308 for Monday, July 29th, 2024. How do I do this again? This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all major podcast platforms, including now in video format on YouTube. Video format is back, thanks to hopefully being able to record all of this and get it all edited up for the usual stuff now that I'm back in the office. If you're enjoying the show, please consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Jonny, the internet knows me as Pixel Riffs, and I'm back to rejoin your much more regular host, Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
Hello, and if you would like to hear all of the reasons why Jonny had an extended vacation in the US, a little bit about our summer movie plans that do include Deadpool and Wolverine, then you should listen to The Render Distance. It's the extended version of the podcast. You can get it at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. We record between 30 and 35 minutes of extra content every single week for our patrons. You get an extra show. And you also get to participate in things like the monthly Minecraft Hangout, now that Jonny is back. That's coming up on this Saturday, which is August the 3rd. As well as the quarterly hangout, which is right now scheduled for August the 10th, the following Saturday. That's where we go over the facts and figures, the download numbers, and now the YouTube metrics for the video on the podcast. So if you're interested in that and you're a patron, then keep an eye on the announcements channel in our Discord when we announce those going live.
Before we quick log in, I also really want to thank Tadpole Milk, Impulse SV, and Fwip for being fantastic co-hosts. I was listening to a couple of the episodes on the plane back, and I still have to catch up on the most recent ones, so looking forward to listening into that. But I am absolutely fresh to everything new that's been going on the Citadel. So Joel, fill me in. What's new with West Hill?
Well, I started a cottage that I was talking about last week on the show, and I decided to push through and just put the brain to the grindstone, so to speak, pardon the Minecraft pun, and get this thing done. And I was able to complete it in the week. I really enjoy finishing off a project, not only like within the week of my streaming, but also finishing a project at the end of a stream day, rather than like halfway through a stream day and like, all right, what am I going to do for the next hour? Like, do I putter in my inventory? Do I set up somewhere else? Like, what do I do? But this kind of like lined up to be done at the very, very end, which was great. And I took some time away. So like these 3 or 4 days after I finished streaming on a Saturday before I come back on a Wednesday was a nice kind of visual break from what I was doing and feeling a little bit frustrated with, which was the roof. And I went back, and because it was mostly mud, brick, packed mud, and brown mushroom block, I decided it needed a highlight. And so I added stripped jungle wood. And there's enough orange in stripped jungle wood to create a nice highlight, but it doesn't create a really high contrast. So between that and adding some jungle trapdoors for details, I was able to finish the roof and felt really happy with it. A lot of detailing like fence gates and trapdoors underneath the eaves and things that make these cottages look quaint and attractive. And so that was really fun. And because I had the palette already worked out, that's kind of my favorite part of a build, is like the main palette is done. And now it's just a matter of working in the details. And because you have your palette selected, you kind of know what range of blocks you're going to use. You know, you're going to be using spruce trapdoors and jungle trapdoors. You're going to be using jungle wood or jungle planks and maybe some mud bricks here and there. And then the base of the cottage, I was able to use those trapdoors again as like garden fences, spruce in the back garden fence, all that kind of stuff. And the main, I think, push this week after finishing the roof was the grounds. So getting the front gardens and the flower gardens in, getting the back garden in. And I was able to do some really unique stuff, because now that I've done a number of farms, I'm trying not to just rinse and repeat. Because of the orange and some of the lilac hues that I used in the gardens around the cottage, I thought, I could use maybe beetroot or something in the back garden for vegetables. But I did that right across the road in those raised beds from the lilac farm from several weeks ago. So I thought, wait a minute, let me see if I can come up with something. I do have some custom textures. So my beetroot is custom, my potatoes are custom, and I decided to pair that with the flowering azalea bush. And so I kind of made it look like a new kind of crop garden. And it worked out really well, because the purple in my custom beetroot matches the azalea purple flowers, which is great. And then the green in the potato also goes pretty well with the azalea green, because I made the potatoes look like real potatoes. And it worked out really well. It looks like a fun little patch of unique vegetables. And then I've also have just some carrots in there, because the orange, while it was bright, it did work pretty well with the orange that you see in the roof of the cottage. And that kind of retrofit happened with changing the fence around the garden. And this is one of the great things about these spots in the area, is that because I don't have walls like I do in the town, if I put in a rough idea for the fence, and then my design for the garden needs me to move the fence by a couple blocks, I just move the fence by a couple blocks. So inside can dictate what the outside looks like rather than being confined to a space. So often when within the town, I've got the walls or a couple of builds already done and I can't move them. I'm stuck with this like 4x8 area or the 6x12 area or whatever. So this was really fun to move around and to create some diversity and also solve a kind of composition problem. Coming down the road from the north, it was really difficult to see the details of the cottage because the cottage has some brown and orange in it, and so did the hill behind it. It was just a grassy hill, default Minecraft block with the green on top and the brown on the bottom. And so I removed the fence at the very back of the garden and created like a really big thicket of bush over the hillside. And it did two things. It diversified the back so it looked more natural and more interesting, but it also created a solid green wall behind the cottage. So now when you're walking down the road, the cottage really stands out in the forefront. Just old compositional tricks from, you know, my work as an artist, bringing them into Minecraft. I just really like it when I can see something like that, know the solution, and work it to my advantage in Minecraft. So that was a lot of fun to get right. There's a lot of little details that I added at the end. I did the interior as I often do. I put like a cod on the countertop. There's a flower vase with an orchid in it, blue orchid. And I never discount the power of an item frame with a flower in it on the wall as a painting, like just to look like a piece of art. It really, really works. And it's nice because it doesn't take up the full block. So a 1x1 painting, while there are some cool new paintings in Minecraft, there's no border, like it goes right to the edge. And that's not how you would hang a painting in real life. If you had a 1 meter wall, you wouldn't put a 1 meter wide painting on it, generally speaking. So it was nice to be able to find these little touches and echo the blue orchids inside as we do outside. So there was a lot of little things like that. I did use the armor stand data pack to create like a little leaning shovel up against a tool chest out back, just little things like that. The scale of the build was nice that I could add a composter and a beehive with no fancy stuff. It's just straight up put them in the world and they work as advertised. I think the one thing that I have left to do is grab a bee from my existing batch of bees floating around the area and bring it over so that we can have a bee kind of like moving around the garden and add some motion there. But that's it. It came together really well. I'm really happy with it.
Speaking of composition as well, like I think it looks really great with like the house that you've got in the background. I can't remember if that's a house or an inn with the mangrove roof. Yeah. I thought it might be the inn. And like in every screenshot of stuff that you're building outside of West Hill now, I think the greatest thing is that you've got context in everything. Like, because you're putting in these last kind of few builds here and there and like little kind of gap fillers and trying to work out what's going on with certain spaces, what you end up with is something that's always got background context for everything. Like you immediately get like a story visual from it. You get, you know, wheat fields in the background and other buildings around it, the town with the giant wall and the sort of curtain wall around it in the far distance. And I think having that creates so much fuller of a picture that's really hard for people who just build like an individual house here and there on a flat, empty Minecraft world to really visualize. And so it must be very rewarding now coming through this area and adding stuff and thinking, yeah, this looks like a sort of picture postcard because of all of the work you put in up until this point, really giving it that context.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's very rewarding and also a lot of work, because when you realize that you want to have a why to everything, like this is just someone's little cottage, but I also wanted it to make it look like it fit and have the back garden be functional, all that kind of stuff. But when you do that, you realize, okay, I can't just plunk a house here. I have to also consider everything around it. And in one way, it's good, like you said, because you have that context and you have that story. But in the other way, it's like, crap, I've got 4 builds that are directly next to this, visually or immediately next to it, which means I don't want to use the blocks from those 4 other builds because it's just going to kind of mesh into the background. So dark oak was out, stone was out, mangrove was out, quartz was out. Like there's a bunch of things that I just couldn't use that I wanted to. And I decided to bring a little bit. In some ways, it kind of informed it. Having a couple of lilacs in the gardens around the cottage makes sense because on one side of the road as you walk by, it's a field of lilacs. Like there's hundreds of them. And so to have one or two on the left side of the road versus the right, it's kind of a nice little balance, just kind of like popping the same color on both sides, which is really fun. But it's coming together. And I think the one issue now that I'm struggling with is I've got these little green spaces now where there's not enough room to build a house. This house broke up this large lawn, but now there's these little lawns, and they're just these little lawns of nothing. They're not someone's property. It's just kind of grass that you walk by as you go down the road. But I'm trying to figure out like what to put there and have it not be the exact same thing I've put in other places. Like I don't want to make just another rock. I don't want to just, I'm trying to figure out how to rough it up a little bit and make it look intentional, but not have it look like it's supposed to be anything eye-catching. It's not supposed to draw your attention. You're supposed to look at the cottage, or you're supposed to look at the path down to the wharf. You're not supposed to look at what's in between. So it's difficult to have that stuff. I remember that in backgrounds from animation. Like you'd have some key elements, like you want to see the tower or you want to see the road, but then you have to have all this set dressing that has to look interesting but not eye-catching. Like it's not supposed to pull you away from the main focus. So I find that a little bit challenging, and it does create a lot of work because now I'm like, much as I said I wasn't going to, I tend to be touching every block of grass in this area. So I'm trying not to go down that rabbit hole because I'll be there forever. But it is coming together. But that's me. Like, what have you been doing since you've been finally back in town and back in the studio doing stuff in Minecraft?
Yeah, I've been back for about a week now, so I have gotten into Minecraft, fortunately. It's not one of those shows where I came back like a couple of days ago and haven't really had a chance to jump in over the weekend. I did get to play a couple of times on stream. I've recorded a fresh episode of Survival Guide. We're back to the usual sort of business. So on Thursday, my first stream back, I just went in and did some resource gathering. It felt like the most sensible thing to do and what my brain could handle at that point. Right. So I just went to my tree farm, chopped some trees, chatted to everybody. It was kind of good to get back in the zone. Then on Saturday and Sunday, when I felt like I didn't really have a whole lot planned, like I want to start new projects. Like I'm considering finding a new build project area, and I've done a little bit of looking around my world, looked around a copy in spectator mode to kind of fly through and check out some landscapes. And there's one that I have my eyes on, but it's quite far away. It's like 6,000 blocks away. And so I was like, I don't want to go and start that like on stream and then have to explain in retrospect what I was doing for a video. So instead, I thought I need to brush up on my Minecraft skills a little bit and just make sure I remember how to do everything. And also, when you haven't been playing Minecraft for a few weeks, getting back into like the zone of looking at moving worlds, as you traverse the world, like the way the FOV interacts with like your personal field of vision and not getting like motion sickness and stuff like that is one of those things that I find it kind of disorienting getting back into Minecraft after a long absence. And so Minecraft Bingo was the perfect antidote to all of that, because I thought, oh yeah, like I can refresh my memory, refresh my skills, just play something kind of casual that didn't make a ton of progress in Survival Guide, and, hopefully made for some fairly compelling viewing. That hasn't been updated to Minecraft 1.21 yet, and I'm actually really curious to see how 1.21 changes the experience of Bingo, because one of the things I always find is that the Bingo card somewhere on it has either a slime ball or a lead or a sticky piston, so you've got to find some way of getting hold of slime. And it's easier to do that in caves, but faster Minecraft Bingo runs don't typically touch caves if you can help it, because it's faster to get precious resources from going diving. Just bring like a door with you and open an air pocket and that kind of thing. But if you stumble upon a trial chamber now, there's a chance it might have a slime spawner in it, and those might be even faster to get to than having to wait overnight and make sure that you find like a swamp in the right sort of time frame that you're able to grab a slime ball within the first like 10 or 15 minutes of your run. Otherwise you have to wait for the next night if you're going to a swamp, and that makes it even more difficult. So yeah, I think Minecraft Bingo's meta is going to change slightly with 1.21. There's obviously new blocks and items that could end up on the Bingo cards, so I'm kind of looking forward to seeing when the map maker ends up updating it to 1.21 how that changes things. But in the meantime, it's still on 1.20.4. And I still have a ton of difficulty finding lush caves, basically anytime I play Minecraft Bingo. So anytime there's an axolotl or a spore blossom or something, I kind of mentally go, well, this one's going to take a little while. But outside of that, I came back into the Survival Guide and explored the new potions, since 1.21 has added those for the trial chamber experience, but they're all brewable as well. So I've been hearing a bit about people using silverfish with the infested potions for XP farms, because you can, I guess, splash in a ley with an infested potion, and the silverfish aren't created when a mob dies, unlike the other effects where they produce slime or like the wind burst explosion when they die, silverfish just get spawned on a small, like a 10% chance when an entity takes damage while they are infested. And so you can set this thing up where basically allays will heal through any damage that they take, so it's actually quite difficult to kill them. And people have basically been setting allays inside like a fire or on like a magma block or something. And so if they have that infested effect, anytime they take damage, they can heal through it, but they produce infinite silverfish. And I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to do anything that like inhumane feeling, even though it's kind of weird to consider this for like testing purposes and the fact that I have a villager trading hall and everything. But I did the slightly more like, I guess, humane way. It was that I took an already undead mob, I grabbed a zombie, name tagged it, stuffed it in a box, and threw a potion on it, and then had a snow golem throw snowballs at it. And the same thing happens. You just end up getting silverfish every so often, and they drop a decent amount of XP, but they don't produce resources for you. But the infested potions are very easy to brew. You just need a stone block as the ingredient. And so I was playing around with that a little bit. I was playing around with the slime, the oozing potion. I was playing around a little bit with wind charged, and like the fourth one is weaving, which is renewable cobwebs, right? So you can get a decent amount of cobwebs from an abandoned mine shaft, but you couldn't get them renewably, and you'd have to go further and further afield if you wanted more. So I think that's a really fun one as well. Also has that little added bonus of you being able to travel through cobwebs slightly faster. And I don't think that's going to be super relevant to gameplay, but it could give players the edge if there's some kind of obstacle course you've created or something and you want players to like figure out some smart ways of getting through quickly. So I've been messing around with those just to get an early look at some of the mechanics behind them. And I've heard that some people have already created absurd slime farms by both combining infested and then when all of the silverfish generate, splashing them with an oozing potion. So when you kill all of the silverfish, you get a ton of slimes, and you kill all of the slimes, and you could kind of perpetuate that, because slimes aren't affected by the oozing potion, but all other mobs except for boss mobs are. So like there's so many different interesting permutations of stuff, because we haven't really had potions that spawned entities in before.
Right.
So this really feels like a new direction for potion brewing in game, and I'm very curious to see if they do anything like this in future, or if they decide once was enough because of the absurd levels of farming players are getting to with some of the potion effects.
Well, and I imagine too that depending on your PC, that might be a hard sell. Like you might hit a big silverfish farm with an oozing potion and have all kinds of slime, and then your computer might just kind of go, and then that might be the end of your gaming session, right? I remember early on when I was playing on a MacBook Pro like years ago, and I was doing some farming and like that, and I remember hitting some limits with like XP orbs. Now this was all back before like some more efficient things had changed, and Mojang had updated the way that the game operated and whatnot. But I was also catching up on Etho, and I don't remember at what number, somewhere's in the mid 200s maybe, out of his 500 episodes that he's done with Etho Plays Minecraft. And he was doing a silverfish experiment where he's trying to create an XP farm with silverfish, and he was trying to like have all of these silverfish kind of pop out of the blocks at the same time. They would infest a block and then they would pop out, and he would try to get as many as he could, and he would be kiting this wave of silverfish, and it looked like the technology you'd see in action movies from like the early 2000s, when they'd have to have a whole lot of things chasing the good guys, you know, whether it's bugs or zombies or whatever. And it just looks like this weird kind of like haze of animation kind of like covering the landscape, kind of like a blanket. And it's so unnerving, because I find as weird and as blocky as this game is, I still don't like silverfish in the game.
Yeah, me neither.
The sound that they make and the squirmy that they do, and like the fact that they come right at you and they're little, and well, I say little, they're probably like 2 feet long, if you look at it from a Minecraft scale. But yeah, this kind of potion work kind of reminds me of those early days of Etho messing with silverfish. And I think it's neat that there's now so many options. Like if you don't want to go to the end and build an ender, which is either one, something you've done a lot and you find it boring, or two, you don't like the end and you're not a player that engages that much in it, then there's lots of options now to create different kinds of farms for XP, for slime. Like it's neat that it's opened up for a lot of players. And I'm curious, because I don't remember whether we talked about this, but are these potions, like, is the what's the slime potion again? It's the
Oozing.
oozing. Is the oozing potion available for players in peaceful mode? Like, would you be able to get slimes, or does it do something else?
You could theoretically brew them, but I don't think the slimes will spawn because they're medium-sized slimes, and it's only the little ones that are effectively passive. And even then, I think they still count as hostile mobs because you don't find them spawning in peaceful, like, flat worlds, which is where you see a lot of slimes spawning, like, as soon as you load the world up. So I think, unfortunately, it's not a solution that works for peaceful players, which is a shame, because if they added any additional ways to farm slime, I would have assumed it was to facilitate slimes in peaceful mode.
Yeah,
so
because if it was the small ones, if it was the ones that couldn't hurt you, like if it was just, that's the difference. Like in peaceful mode, they only spawn the small ones, and in the regular Minecraft survival, it spawned the medium ones that could attack you. That would be a really interesting solution, because it would be not necessarily vanilla parody, because it's already vanilla, but just it's the kind of thing that you expect to see when they update something for Bedrock, where they want it to function the same that it does on Java, but for the different game modes within Java Minecraft.
Yeah. So maybe something like that will come along in future. Maybe there'll be a different way of obtaining slime with oozing potions, but I think for now, unfortunately, that's what we're stuck with. So we'll see if something like that comes along in future. In the meantime, I'm getting inspiration from my forays into the Elden Ring DLC for this project area that I have in mind, and I want to do a lot more environmental stuff, just kind of playing around with natural looking environments that aren't necessarily grass or moss or anything like that, because there's a couple of really surprisingly colorful areas in the Elden Ring DLC that seem sort of out of place in a dark fantasy kind of game, but I think you could do some really cool stuff with like Nylium and things like that in the overworld. So I'm curious if I can work some of that stuff in. In the meantime, plenty of food for thought in other games that I've been picking up here and there on my travels, and now I've returned from my travels. In the meantime, we've got some news to cover. Only a little bit of stuff this week, since there are no new snapshots and only a couple of very minor Bedrock previews and betas, so we're skipping over that stuff. And instead, we're going to talk about MC Championship and Minecraft collaborating on an event called the Ender Cup. We'll have a link to the Minecraft.net post about this. It was published back in July 16th. The Ender Cup was a special edition of MC Championship to celebrate Minecraft's 15th anniversary, taking place Saturday, July 27th. So if you missed the event, if you're under a rock on that particular day, or you're watching the Olympics or anything like that, then the VODs should be up for most, if not all, of the participants. This was kind of Minecraft's own Olympics, I suppose. So Minecraft teamed up with Nox Crew, the team behind MC Championship, to additionally create an event server running from July 22nd to August 5th. The server allows fans to try MCC minigames for themselves and earn a 15th anniversary cape for Bedrock Edition, with potential rumblings that it might be coming to Java Edition at a later date, since capes can be tied through your Microsoft account now. Either way, the server is only accessible via Bedrock Edition, but a dedicated button on the main menu screen should allow you to join if your device has access to online play, and more details of that will be in the Minecraft.net article linked in our show notes. In addition to that, Minecraft has a collab with Beats headphones. This was also published on July 16th, continuing this trend of 15th anniversary celebrations. To celebrate the year of our 15th anniversary, it says, we've teamed up with Beats to craft the special edition Minecraft and Beats Solo 4 headphones, featuring a sleek creeper-inspired design. We're releasing a very limited run of these headphones, available only in the United States and the United Kingdom from July 18th. So those are available online from Apple and Target in the USA and the EE Store in the UK, and are also available at select physical locations for those retailers. Once again, more information on that should be in the Minecraft.net article, and we figured we'd flag that since some of them still seem to be available. It says they're a limited run, so maybe get hold of a pair if you feel like getting them while supplies last.
Minecraft Bedrock Edition Beta and Preview 1.21.20.24 was published on July 25th, 2024. Just a few gameplay bug fixes worth mentioning in the small list of changes added in the latest beta and preview. Large chests no longer disappear when near the edge of the screen. Fixed double plant blocks breaking in older worlds, and the player now faces the same direction they exited when re-entering the world.
I'm still waiting for them to announce that bundles are in a Bedrock preview, because that basically starts the countdown for me for when they're going to appear in Java Edition Vanilla, and I could not be more excited to introduce them into the survival guide world, especially at the level where I'm at now, where I find myself needing a bundle, and especially having used them on Minecraft SOS a whole bunch, and just not having them around, not having like the facility to get rid of all of the little odds and ends of like redstone components or plants and seeds and like little bits of food that I picked up. When I was demonstrating the potions in this episode of Survival Guide, I was killing a bunch of mobs because I just wanted to splash them with an oozing potion and then kill the pig or chicken or whatever it was that I'd splashed to see how it worked. But then that meant I had like a bunch of leather and feathers and pork chops and stuff sitting in my inventory, and I just hadn't found myself going to like dump all of that in a chest somewhere when it could so easily have been bundled up and saved for later. So I kind of I'm yearning for the bundle at this point, and I'm really hoping it makes its way into Bedrock soon, because that means hopefully Java is going to follow shortly behind.
We've been seeing a few trickles of Bedrock updates over the last few weeks. There's been nothing from Java, as the Mojang team in Sweden is on vacation, or in the Swedish, I guess, culture. They have like big breaks in the summertime, so this is one of the things that's going on. But of course, Bedrock, I believe, is developed in the US, so they're still going on a few things. But it has slowed down. Like the updates for Bedrock have not been very big. So I am curious to see what's going to happen with any potential minor updates to 1.21. Although something that I saw that Foot posted, I believe on Twitter recently, was that there has not been a quick patch to 1.21 to fix a critical error or any kind of like really problematic thing. It's just been 121 solid, good to go. And so he was tipping his hat to the Mojang team, which I think is great, because again, on this show, I can't remember the last time we had a solid launch where there wasn't an immediate 0.1, 0.2 patch that came out to fix an issue that maybe neither you or I experienced, but it was definitely something that was affecting some players, whether it was like a game crash or something like that. But there hasn't been any, so it's been pretty low-key.
Yeah, 1.21 was the beginning of June, right? It was like the first or second week of June, so it's been
13th,
at least 6 weeks now. Like, we're at the end of July and we've not heard any rumblings of like a 1.21.1 snapshot or anything like that. So yeah, again, I got to extend some credit to the Mojang team for putting together a really solid launch. I think it's great, and really cool that the minor updates can instead be reserved for potentially like new quality of life features coming through, like the bundle, which has obviously been in limbo for a little while on Java. And yeah, there's room for stuff like that to tweak features, to add a couple of extra little things like the decorated pots being filled up from 1.20. Like, that's stuff that came further down the pipeline that was just gonna improve the quality of those features all in all. So yeah, crossing my fingers for more stuff, but it can take its time. I'm really happy with 1.21 so far.
Well, I mean, nothing happened while you were away, so
yeah.
now it's anyone's guess as to what might happen now that you're back for a while too.
They're off the usual schedule, yeah. So as far as the Ender Cup stuff goes, I was too jet lagged and busy with Hermitcraft recap at that point to really tune in for the Ender Cup event, but I saw a ton of activity from friends and server mates who participated, and the Cape on the 15th anniversary like Nox Crew collab server has generated a lot of interest. So there's a lot of people right now comparing their stats on different mini games that they're playing and stuff. It's kind of cool to see people all coming together around like an event that seems to have reached such a high profile status within the community like MCC has.
Yeah, I didn't watch much of it either. I saw a lot of folks on my Twitch follow list participating in the Ender Cup, and I had to kind of look up what it was, and I'm familiar with some of the MCC events, but I don't really watch a lot of competitive stuff. It was also a beautiful weekend here in Nova Scotia, so I was outside to touch grass. Well, technically I was outside to touch sand. I was at the beach and had a very lovely time. But when it comes to stuff like this, I find that it's very similar to sports. In some ways, I am more interested in sports that I played. So I grew up playing basketball and golf. I find those a lot easier to get into and watch on TV. I don't follow anything personally, but if it's on at someone else's house, I'm more inclined. I do watch football, but not a lot of it, so I can still follow it. I think it's because I followed it when I was at Mount A, in university. But when it comes to esports, I was curious whether you had previous esports that you followed before getting so into Minecraft, and then that makes it easier for you to like tune into things like the Ender Cup or MCC, because I find where I don't participate in the PvP sections or the PvE parts of Minecraft nearly as much as you do, I don't even really try Minecraft Bingo, so like little challenging and time trials and things like that. I find that it's not like I can't follow it, but I'm not as invested, I think, in events like this. So do you find that because of your experience with alternate game modes that you're more invested in stuff like Ender Cup when you're not jet lagged from obviously a long trip?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily passion for mini games and stuff that would draw me to something like MCC. It's more about following the people involved in it. It's like,
Sure.
in some cases, fortunately for me, it's people that I've been on servers with, and people, obviously, I follow Hermitcraft, so a lot of the Hermits are involved in like MCC and other tournaments like that, and Twitch Rivals events and things like that. And some of those I've had the fortune of being on the casting desk for, so I've been like commentating live as stuff like that has happened. And I think it's really more about the personalities behind it than it is the games, even though the games take a lot of like planning and behind the scenes like play testing and stuff in order to put events like that together. It's a phenomenal effort from like a technical level and an organizational level, but I think people are really there to cheer on like their favorite streamers and YouTubers and that kind of thing. So I feel like more so than having an investment in Minecraft minigames, I think it's an investment in like, that's my friends playing, and like the people who you've been following through Hermitcraft or Empires or SOS, or a couple of other folks who are speedrunners who have a following. I think it's really cool just seeing your favorite people going head to head against each other or teaming up. And obviously they change up the teams pretty regularly with events like MCC, so you'll find some people paired together who's like an unexpected pairing, or a group that you're happy to see return after a few contests worth of absence. So it's kind of cool to see how people interact and who the favorite teams end up being as a result.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because when I was playing some competitive games, never in any kind of tournaments, just kind of my own kind of hobby, it was StarCraft 2 and Heroes of the Storm for a little bit when it first came out, before all my friends got better than me because I had no time to keep up with it. And I would watch those games, especially if there was podcasters or friends that I followed that were involved, whether it would be casting or playing. Folks like Scott Johnson, Kyle Ferguson, Garrett Weinzierl, that just are fun, funny dudes and are competitive. And you get them on the opposite sides of a team, whether they're trash talking but not revealing anything about what's going on, or whether they're all on the same team and then they're now trash talking an absent friend that can't hear what they're saying, and they're just being kind of fun and joshy about it. I did find that really enjoyable, but I also knew the games. Like, I wasn't just watching for the personalities. I also knew what was going on and was trying to learn a little bit as well. But it's one of those things that I always find more. It's one of those things that I can track better when it's like a top down or like a map sort of situation. So I've never been able to get into Overwatch because you're only ever seeing one person's perspective at a time, and you have to switch cameras all the time. And I can never really get an overview of what's going on. Whereas with Heroes of the Storm, it was top down. Like, you might only be looking at one player at a time, but you still have a whole map that you can look at, and you can kind of see what's going on. You can see the overall goal. And so with Minecraft stuff, you're flipping usually between the perspectives of the different people that are involved, which can be fun in hindsight too, especially if there's like a surprise thing that happened or somebody sneaks up on somebody else, and you can get the both perspectives of like somebody dying and wondering what the heck just happened versus one of the hermits maybe sneaking up on a buddy from behind, and you get to see that anticipation. The whole audience knows it's coming, but the person that's going to get killed doesn't know. So yeah, I've not yet been into any of the new Minecraft games.
Yeah, like when I was part of some of the Twitch Rivals events, they had the really cool innovation of including some camera accounts flying around in spectator modes to capture the action, and they would cut to those feeds occasionally, which made a lot of sense. It was unlike like it would be like if you were watching a football match and occasionally it cut to like a GoPro that was strapped to the football players' heads, like it's not necessarily the kind of footage that you're used to from sports events, but like naturally they wanted to capture people's feeds, including like face cams for people's reactions and stuff as well. So it would cut back and forth between like an aerial view of what was going on and maybe like a close up. They could kind of zoom into certain stuff and get like close to where the action was happening, but then be able to pull back and give you the context of everything going on in the arena. So there are some smart ways of running events like that, and I'm not sure how much of that can happen in MCC, but I think it's kind of a fun way of approaching events like that. The other thing that we wanted to cover for the news was just this headphone launch, and I'm not really the biggest fan of Beats headphones. They're not quite to my listening taste, and I also want to highlight the fact that they've been a victim of the tech like tech retail's 1-to-1 US dollars to Great British pounds conversion rate, which is like really unfortunate. It happens with video games as well, where you'll get like a $70 game that's £70, in the UK, which is closer to like $95 US, and it's the same with these. Like they retail for $199 in the US, and they're £199 in the UK, which makes them $255 at the current exchange rate. And I'm like, why does this keep happening? But I think that's the virtue of us being an island nation, it being difficult to import stuff here and like additional kind of taxes and fees and that kind of stuff. But like they don't end up cheap. So if you want your Minecraft headphones, fair play to you. They look stylish, but they're also pretty expensive for my taste.
It's the same thing in Canada because of the exchange rate. Generally, something that's $99 at a U.S. retail store is $120 or $130 here. And they don't hide it. The price is just different. And if you can find it in a U.S. store, then you're going to be buying it with U.S. cash, and so your exchange rate is just as good as whatever bank you're using or whatever online bank you're using, like PayPal or something. Which don't do that. PayPal's exchange rate is terrible. But I've never been a big Beats fan either. I find them overly bassy, and I think that's probably the target audience. But I have a big head, and I just don't do over the head headphones. I've tried, I'd want to, I cannot find them to fit. And as a podcaster, I've always wanted a really nice, high quality set of headphones. I've always wanted to do that. I've never been an audiophile as far as music goes. Like I like music, but I listen to it for pastimes, and mostly what I listen to is podcasts on the go. So as you can see on video, I rock the old Apple EarPods. They're wired. So are the ones on my streaming PC. I've always had them. I've been an iPhone user for a long time. So for a while there, whenever you got a new iPhone, you always ended up with a new pair of headphones, and you ultimately had to replace some or have a spare. So like they were just always around. So that's what I've used. I do now have some AirPods Gen 2 AirPods that I use for my phone on a day-to-day basis. I don't really know why I haven't transitioned to using them on the Mac for streaming and not for streaming, but for podcasting. I think it's because the Mac tends to like favor the microphone in them, and I don't want it to. And so I'm always having to fiddle with settings. And this, it's super simple, and there's low points of failure. I plug these in and they just work, and for whatever reason, the Mac doesn't look at the microphone on the headset as the one it always remembers, the Yeti. So I've never really been into the Beats as over the head headphones because I've never found them very comfortable. And the one time I did have a good experience with over the head headphones, I bought myself a Steel Series, I think it was a Series 7 gaming headset, Bluetooth, and the sound was fantastic. They worked with my phone. They worked wirelessly with my PC, so I wouldn't have a cord dangling, while I was doing stuff. They hurt my head. The Steel Series just put too much pressure, and it was like the little bone behind your ear, and it was like I could wear them for 30 minutes. I was like, darn it, I have to return these. And it was such a disappointment because it was the first time that I found a nice over the head, headphone that sounded the way that I wanted it to, and was delivering the convenience of like the Bluetooth and the wireless, and it had a microphone if I wanted to use them with the Xbox. Like there was all kinds of great features, but I just had to return them. But also they were in that like $250 to $300 range, and I felt guilty just buying them in the first place. So the fact that they didn't work, I was like, well, suits me right. I'm sticking with the $20 headsets that are just earbuds, right?
Yeah, I think honestly the thing I'm taking away from collabs like the Beats thing, while I might not necessarily be the target audience for it, I think it's just cool to see Minecraft's recognizability and phenomenon as like a brand being pushed to like as far as they can take it for this 15th anniversary. So that stuff is super fun to see. I doubt we'll see too much more of it now that all of the big milestones and announcements have gotten out of the way, but stuff like this is still going to trickle through here and there. In the meantime, we're going to move on into chunk mail for this episode, and as usual, if you'd like to email the show, the email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Let us know any of your little observations, little gameplay experiences, and stuff like that as you've been having them in Minecraft 1.21, or even earlier versions. If you're playing modded, if you're playing older versions of Minecraft, let us know what you've experienced lately. Keep your emails short and to the point so that we can have a nice discussion about them. That really helps them get included in the show more easily. Joel is going to go ahead and read this one, so take it away.
This email is from Ulonkel, a landscape artist member of our Patreon. Data packs and UI improvements. I've been experimenting with data packs a bit recently and shared some of that experience in the SponChunks Patreon Discord. What they've added this update is great, and I really hope to see more of the game opened up to data packs. However, the fact that data packs are so hidden away when creating a new world, and how the experimental features system has almost hijacked them, seemed odd to me. The game labeled my data pack as an experimental feature. The creativity that data packs can provide, and that I predict they will provide in the future updates, I think means data packs should take a higher priority when creating a world. I want to make it clear that I do not want the Bedrock Marketplace on Java Edition, but I do think removing some of the friction to adding data packs to a world would go a long way, especially if Mojang is going to continue opening up more of the game to data pack modification in the future. Very interested to hear your thoughts on this. Ulankel fell out of the world after accidentally deleting the hitbox on a Bedrock block. The game has decided that you are OP and removed you.
Yeah. So I have a lot of thoughts about data packs in general, and it kind of goes back to the early days of my experience with Minecraft when I was coming into a community that had already sort of settled on the fact that mods were an important part of the Minecraft experience and was very keen on Mojang implementing an official modding API. And that idea seems to have fallen by the wayside now in favor of things like data packs, and from the Bedrock community, now that Bedrock is a much more well-defined version of Minecraft, Bedrock add-ons. And obviously there's been leaps and bounds in add-ons, especially more recently, and I think data packs are obviously still improving and still, exposing new facets of the game to players who want to modify them. We saw this most recently with data-driven enchantments and stuff like that in this most recent update. I think the thing about data packs, though, is that they're still an evolving format. It's kind of difficult to push them as like a surface-level feature because they are still growing into what they can be. And there's clearly movement towards more of the game being data-driven and available to the player to modify, but it doesn't come across as a polished product in the same way that the Bedrock Edition Marketplace does. And I think the part of the reason that Bedrock Marketplace can be so clearly integrated, aside from it bringing in revenue for Mojang and making Minecraft continue to be profitable, is because there's more quality control, and maybe as a result of that, or maybe like as a kind of a way of steering that quality control, there are tools and documentation to help aspiring creators learn. You can find those on the Minecraft website. I've got a link to those in the show notes for people who are interested. There are, item and entity and block creating wizards that effectively allow you to put together something really quickly and have it programmed and ready to go as an add-on with relative speed without you having to do your own research when it comes to creating stuff like data packs for Java Edition. And I find a lot more of the Java game has, from a long way back now, been community-driven. Like, community members have made the mods, they've set up their own spaces to distribute mods. A lot of that infrastructure already existed for Java Edition before Minecraft was really up and running and a large enough team that they could take on anything like improving access to those facets of the game for people who wanted to modify it. So there's a more hands-off approach to guidance from Mojang themselves, and a bit more of a sense that it's open season for modifying Java Edition. And even with the more codified elements of Java Edition data packs, like the fact that Mojang themselves are kind of rolling out these changes instead of modders having to hack them into the game, it still feels like Java is a bit more free and easy with what you can do because it's community distributed still. So it's a little bit difficult, I think, for them to make data packs feel approachable, but also reassure new players that they aren't necessary. It's kind of a balancing act that they're having to do. And while this might feel kind of strange, like looking at it from a surface level, you don't think, yeah, data packs are kind of buried in the create new worlds options and the menu options and stuff. But that's almost out of necessity, because there are still some aspects of the menu system when you're creating a new world that new players get mystified by. I still have people asking me what adventure mode is when you choose that from your list of game modes. They sort of think maybe it's like a story thing that's going to have NPCs and stuff in it, and then they wonder why they can't break any blocks or really interact with anything.
Right.
And yeah, that's an unfortunate facet of the way the game has set itself up for a long time and doesn't want to remove features like that. So I think they're very careful about how they introduce features like that, just in case it trips up new players who just want the default experience and aren't really sure what that is.
And I think that the key word there, because I agree, is quality control. And you've also got the added, I guess, communication of experimental features happening in snapshots. that may or may not be consistent, may or may not break things in your world, and are encouraging players to be cautious and back up your world before you try to do something with an experimental feature. And I think that they want data packs to be approached the same way. I use several data packs on the Citadel, some of which are very basic recipe tweaks from vanillatweaks.net or my own. Others are more complex. And one issue that I've mentioned before, especially with a long-term server like the Citadel, is that you're basically at the mercy of how the data pack authors want to operate. If they are going to be consistent with updating the data pack, whether they're going to update the data pack, whether it needs it or not, ultimately still causing problems down the line, or if they're going to abandon it altogether. I've had situations where recently, with the new ways that the data packs work with the new data-driven content, that some authors are just like, it's just too much work. I'm tired of having to redo this every time Mojang changes the way that things work. So you end up being at the mercy of those updates. Thinking about the tools that are available for the marketplace for Bedrock, I would love to see more tools like the crafting recipe generator that I used to become available for Java Edition, putting the control of the data pack back into the players or the server owner's hands when coding isn't your strong suit. More WYSIWYG, more graphic interface. It's going to be obviously better for simple things like the website I use is crafting.thedestruction. It's spelled a little bit funny, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. But that apparently has been updated for 1.21. So while it's going to take me a bit of time to go and just look at all the main thing is my wood cutting recipes on the stone cutter. Basically, a lot of our wood recipes on the Citadel, they work the way that the stone recipes work on the stone cutter. We can put wood in there. And it's not complicated, but you just have to go through every kind of wood type and every kind of output and just kind of input the ratios that you want. It not hard, but it does take, a decent chunk of your time to do it. But that interface, that website, allowed me to do that much faster than researching how to code every one of these things myself. Removed a lot of the potential human error for like missing a semicolon or something in your code and having it break and wondering why and all that kind of stuff. So it makes it a lot more accessible for players like us that want to have a few tweaks on a long-term server. And I would love to see more things like that available for other data packs, like anti-Enderman grief, like not allowing Enderman to pick up blocks, or changing the blast radius or the blocks that are affected by a creeper explosion. Different things like that would be something as simple as a slider or a block selection, a toggle in a GUI that would allow players to apply data packs, to their worlds as they see fit. But again, you have to just worry about the quality of that, because I often run into situations where I'm thinking about, how do I do this? Or is this the right way or wrong way to do it? And realizing that I'm trying to do something from a data pack or from a vanilla way. And I've had a backwards way of doing it on the server for so long as a data pack that's so subtle and under the hood that I think that's how vanilla Minecraft works. And it's not. Yeah. Case in point, I think I can craft cobwebs with string and slime. And when we were talking about renewable cobwebs earlier, I'm just like, why have I never thought about renewable cobwebs? Because I don't have to, because I can craft them, right?
Yeah.
And so it's difficult in that way, that because they're not front and center on my world whenever I load up Minecraft, I don't think about them as much once they're already installed, because a lot of times it's just a matter of changing the version number in the data pack and it immediately rolls forward. It's only been this 1.20.5 to 1.21 move where you've had to pay a little bit more attention as to what data packs are rolling forward. So you do kind of forget about them sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's one of those situations where Mojang could provide tools and documentation for Java Edition. I think in some areas they have. There's some, even when the developers will put stuff on GitHub pages explaining how certain new mechanics work. I know Nembon was really good at that when the tick commands were added and stuff like that, being able to freeze ticks and warp stuff and mess around with that. But I think the problem there is that you have to make sure that stuff is sort of future-proof. Whenever I go back looking for commands, whether it's to edit my position more accurately or mess around with rotating and posing armor stands without using the armor stand book or mods to do that, the command syntax is always old because I'm looking at like Reddit posts and stuff from 2020, and like the command language has changed in subtle ways since then, or like it's still referring to command blocks as a way to do stuff when it's done by data packs now. And so like there's subtle ways in which the game changes that you've just got to make sure you're on top of constantly if you're the official source of information to players. So they rely on the community to really keep up with that, where it's not necessarily on the development team who are trying to push the technology forward to make sure everyone's on the same page about that. Speaking of your stonecutter recipes, actually, I wanted to use that as a springboard into our main discussion this week. This is an idea I've had percolating really since the advent of the crafter, but also more recently since I've been able to get my hands in the crafter in 1.21 and really figure out like how it's going to be used as part of regular gameplay. I've been thinking about what the crafter means for future additions to the game. And I think the baseline idea I have here is that when you're considering future crafting recipes, Mojang can now sort of take the limiters off stuff that might feel unwieldy to craft manually. And I can imagine that in the past they might have wanted to add crafting recipes, but found that there are certain pain points with different stuff that they can craft that players aren't really willing to go past, like dispensers being the main one, right? They added the ability to craft dispensers using broken bows because it took out some of the steps of having to have a completely new bow or a completely fully repaired bow in order to craft a dispenser. But players still found crafting dispensers kind of painful because you still can't stack bows, and so the amount of them that you have to have filling up your inventory along with all of the other crafting supplies meant that you could only craft a few at a time. Enter the automatic crafter, which people can now hook up to their skeleton farms, filter out the bows by various means, and have it automatically craft dispensers for them. Some of the more complex recipes in the game now feel a little bit easier to craft in bulk thanks to something automatically doing it for you. And there are other quality of life changes like the recipe book that have contributed to that being a little easier, but I'm curious if now Mojang feels like they can add some crafting recipes that are deliberately a little harder to craft manually to lean players into using the crafter. And there are a few examples where that could be the case. You have unstackable items like tools, armor, buckets of liquid. I already find that the cake crafting recipe is something that I tend to avoid. I tend to trade with farmers for cake because getting hold of that many buckets of milk is kind of a pain, even if you can easily farm eggs, sugar, and wheat, but just having to milk cows over and over again and fill your inventory with buckets, it's like bringing lava back from the nether. You're using shulker boxes to do it in any great quantity at that stage. But if you've got a cow farm that you just have to right-click a bunch with buckets and the buckets get spat out of your inventory into a crafter, then suddenly you have the ability to manufacture cake en masse that way and circumvent having to use farmer villagers for it. So maybe there are occasions on which, you know, bows, axes, swords, whatever else, like other tools and things that can be used to, you know, would feature in future crafting recipes could potentially be used for additional stuff that Mojang wants to add to future updates. Also, stack sizes is another thing. Like, it's easier to automatically craft snow blocks now than it is, I think, to carry a bunch of snowballs that still only stack to 16 in your inventory and only be able to craft like a stack and a half of snow blocks before you've run out of inventory space. So yeah, I'm wondering, with the crafter being easier to set up when a recipe only requires one item, do we think that maybe Mojang can encourage players to take a deeper look at the crafter? Are players going to adopt the crafter for more complex recipes if they get added in future? Or do you think it'll just put people off crafting more complex items in general?
So we were talking a little bit about this last week on the show, and I think that there's like a 3-part balance to this. It's the complexity of the recipe versus the time investment versus the yield. Mm-hmm. And I think that even maybe with player preference as a runner-up, because the email last week was about glass bottles, the amount of glass bottles that you get from the new Witch Farm updates with the drop rate, and the player wanting to crush glass bottles into some sort of dust. The idea that we had in discussion was silica dust, and then be able to then craft sand after that.
Uh-huh.
And Tadpole Milk was like, I like collecting sand. It's cathartic. He wanted to continue to do it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's great if you don't need a lot of sand. If you just need a quick bit of sand for decorating, then going to collect it is going to be way easier than setting up a witch farm for glass bottles or trading for glass bottles or anything else. And I think that, if you've got the complexity thing is difficult because that is going to be a hard balance between making it unpleasant for the player because it's complex, but then also you don't want to force players or have players feel that they need to make an automated crafting setup for this if it's outside of their wheelhouse, right? You don't want them to feel obligated or like forced into that. But for me, the biggest thing is the time investment. Like I, as a player, really enjoy things happening in the background. It makes me feel efficient. It evolves, I guess, naturally as you progress in the world, as you become a better builder and you want more things, or you build larger things, take on larger tasks, you realize you go through materials a lot faster. And nothing pulls me out of my creative flow more than like, oh crap, I need to go get more of this. I guess that means I have to walk across the server, go collect something, whatever. But as an endgame player, I have a lot of shulker boxes and things in my ender chest that allow me to create something in a pinch. And I think that balance between like, if I only needed a half stack, I'm going to do that. If I need a shulker box full of something, I'm not crafting that by hand. Like that's the kind of thing where I should have the forethought to say like, in the modern city, I need a lot of concrete. And so I'm going to have something in the background doing that for me if I can, or set up some sort of machine or gameplay feature that's going to help me with that. And that is, I think, also part of the yield situation where you've got the stone cutter, which is like the 1-to-1 ratio versus, the crafter, which has a different yield. And I'm okay with the price of yield for materials going in being lower if it's being crafted automatically in the background. And manually might be a better yield, but then it pulls you out of what you're doing. Do you really want to sit there for 5 or 10 minutes and craft the amount of things that you need versus could you just set this up in the background? And I think maybe that also might be a personal thing for me because like I'm savvy enough with redstone that I can set up something like a sugarcane farm or a pumpkin farm or any kind of other redstone farm, creeper farm, and let that run in the background. But if that's not your strength, then all of a sudden that yield becomes a much higher weighted feature of that threefold decision. Like if you want that to happen in the background, but you can't set up the initial ingredients with a farm, then you might be more inclined to do it manually. So it's a delicate balance. Like I don't envy the Mojang crew in terms of trying to figure out whether or not the crafter is going to be used to encourage recipes. And I think too that like having just added the crafter to the game, having more unique recipes could also be a problem because if it's something that doesn't require the crafting table and they add a new block and there's a new way to do it, then people are just like, well, you just gave us the crafter. And now for this new block that's cool, we can't use the crafter. So I feel like they're kind of, I don't want to say funneling themselves into using the crafter, but I hope they can use it to their advantage and to players' advantage as well, because I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I've been enjoying playing around with the crafter, just having it hooked up to various farms and stuff, but I find that a lot of the time I'm still opting to craft stuff manually just because setting up a crafter takes more time than it does to just go to the chests and grab the supplies myself. And
yeah.
I think it's really about investing in infrastructure in your world and making it possible to just go and grab stuff whenever you have it. It needs to be supported by a ton of automated farms in order to feel like it's viable for crafting redstone components and stuff like that. You need a witch farm and a cobblestone farm, maybe even some piglin bartering to get you quartz so that it can start outputting things like comparators and observers for you. And yes, you can feed in a couple of shulker boxes of that and you'll be set for a while, but still sooner or later it's going to run out, and then your time is then spent refilling that as opposed to time that could be spent just grabbing what you needed and crafting what you needed. So I think we're seeing a bit of a split in community opinion on whether or not the crafter is even worth it, because effectively it's just an automated way of using a mechanic that we already had in game. So I think the yield idea is an interesting one, and I sort of wonder if manual or workstation crafting being more effective than using the crafter is necessarily a solution, because I think lowering the crafter's output is going to disincentivize players from using it, because people in the Minecraft community in general are so keen on efficiency. And whether that is, obviously the crafter is saving you time if used a certain way, and it's, saving you a little bit of the back and forth for materials if it's set up a certain way. But if it was lacking in material efficiency, I feel like that would be a big deal for a lot of people. And you couldn't really do it with recipes that are more complex. Like, you wouldn't want to put in the type of input that you have to have it automatically craft redstone repeaters, put in enough material for 64 repeaters and only get like 48 out or something like that, right? So it would have to be for materials that you could break down from bulk resources like wood or, things that you're making from cobblestone. And I feel like stairs is probably the only... I guess cut copper is the only other example in which the ratio of what you get from crafting is different from the crafting table or the automatic crafter to the specialized workstation like the stonecutter, right? I think if there was any more disparity like that in Minecraft in general, then players would find themselves kind of frustrated by that more than find it an incentive to use one thing or the other. I think they would consider that just a disparity that needed fixing on the back end, like by Mojang at that point. Like, if you could get more trapdoors out of manually crafting them versus automatically crafting them, I think people would manually craft them every single time. Like, I don't see why you would need to run a trapdoor factory in the background when you could, manually craft 16 trapdoors at a time from a handful of wood blocks and you'd be set for a while.
Yeah, I mean, as someone that uses a lot of trapdoors, I might have that trapdoor farm eventually, but it's one of those things where I think about those, and I think about the items that you don't use that much of. Like it's that weird back and forth between like, well, how often do you use something like a fence gate, a lightning rod, or a flower pot? Like, do you need those yields to be balanced or different from a crafter or not? Like, you're only ever crafting like you said, like a 16 of them at a time, maybe, depending on what you're doing. And even then, most of the time for fence gates, I use one or two, unless you're doing a farm, like it's a redstone farm that you need them for their hitbox or something. But most of the time, and the average player is not using that many of them. And so when I think about the yields, I think the bigger detraction from the crafter is probably the redstone involved. Even though I know it's not overly complex compared to some redstone contraptions, it seems like it's a little bit harder to set up and understand and get to work right once you get beyond just filling it with the same thing and condensing the block. Like, that seems pretty straightforward to me. But once you get past that and you have to craft a thing that has either a shape or has an order in which those items have to go into the crafter, similar to how brewing stand automation works, if you've ever tried that. I think that those are the things where the crafter then becomes a bit of a hurdle for people. And on one hand, like, I know that I've seen this probably in situations like Hermitcraft, where a person that is not the best at redstone is, I guess, introduced to the crafter and its possibilities by someone that does know, and then they've taken the fishermen to the shore and taught them how to fish, and they're like, oh wait a minute, I need so much of this stuff for my landscaping project, and you're telling me that if I just follow your redstone guidance here, my friend, I can have this stuff be automatically crafted. And then they start to get excited about it. And I think it's just a matter of, as you mentioned earlier, like the community driven part of this game is like having your friends that are good at redstone showing you how to use the crafter, or watching videos online about how to use it and how simple it can be and what the benefits are. It's one of those blocks and features in the game that I think that you don't necessarily know what the advantages are of it from the outside. You really need to try to implement it. Like, you have to give it a solid try. And then I think your eyes will be opened to what the possibilities are. And I hope that it would encourage people to learn more of that aspect of the game, because as something that I've, learned from other games like Satisfactory that I play, I really enjoy that automation. I really enjoy the satisfaction of putting in that headstrong work ahead of time, like the lead up to it. and the focus of getting something up and going and then hitting the on switch and watching it do the thing that you designed it to do is really satisfying to me. But I know that that's, not unique to me, but it's a unique set of players that get that out of gameplay and may not be always, what they're looking for from Minecraft, right?
Yeah, and for the people who aren't looking for that from Minecraft, the other side of this thought was, is it now incentive for Mojang to make crafting itself more diverse and interesting, and have new additions take on some kind of crafting mechanic that is outside of the traditional crafting interface? And my main example for this for a while has been concrete powder. Like, obviously, we craft that in the crafting table or the new crafter, but to turn it into solid concrete, that has to be done through interaction with water. And that's the only way to get hold of that block. I think you can't even farm concrete from anywhere. Like, I don't think it exists in any structures or anything like that. It's usually like terracotta and stuff that you find naturally in the structures that are out there. So I wonder if, like, other mechanics like gathering powder snow, for example, they rely on player interaction, and obviously powder snow gets a bit awkward for inventory management, but is there any other sort of tactile crafting that can be added in that allows for generation of resources or, transformation of resources that could not require the crafting table or a crafting interface at all? And the example you gave earlier of crushing glass bottles down to get some kind of sand-based resource, like, that could easily be something which, it involves throwing the glass bottles on the ground and then dropping an anvil on them or something, right? Like, you have to find interesting ways of interacting with either existing stuff or new additions that circumvent the crafter entirely so that we don't just end up relying on the crafter for everything. But the question is, how Minecrafty does that feel if something isn't using the crafting table as an interface? Like, do we think there's still space for mechanics like that? It couldn't be everything, but do you think there's room for a few more things like concrete powder to work their way in?
I think it depends on if you could later use it in the crafter for the final step, or maybe the initial step. Like, maybe you have to get something, like turn a resource into a different resource through the crafter, and then use what the crafter puts out in a different method. So like, we've got sand and gravel that goes into concrete powder, for example. But there's also the dye involved, and the dye is something that you could automate with a flower farm crafter, etc. So there's some things like that where I feel like if they did add a new crafting method, something outside of it, like using the cauldron to do something with water, using other like fire maybe in the world. Maybe you have to harden something instead of putting it in a furnace. Maybe you have to put it on a campfire or something like that.
Yeah,
it has to be placed by a player.
have that with mud going into clay now, right? Like,
sure.
That's the other.
Yeah.
But then if you want to break the clay automatically using TNT, then you need the crafter to craft it back from clay balls into a clay block if you want to fire that for terracotta.
Yeah.
And so, like, it takes a journey through the crafter, but that, like, goes to and from other methods of transforming the block, right?
Yeah, and I think I like that. I think that if they brought in more methods, then I think they'd have to consider the crafter either at the start or the end or the middle or something, because it would feel strange for them to circumvent it, like, especially if it was a new update like coming up soon where they just introduced the crafter and oh, by the way, here's something that you can't use the crafter for, and you're going to want it, you're going to want this new block, and you're probably going to want a lot of it, but, like, sorry, we can't use the crafter for it. So yeah, I'm curious to see what they might do there. I like the idea of getting into things that are easy to craft, like things that you want on the go, and making the choice to use the crafter for. Like, so I use stone bricks a lot in Westo, like, they're everywhere, and, like, you don't even need a crafting table. You can make them in your inventory. Like, it's a 2x2 grid, right? But when you're just using them absolutely everywhere and you're going through shulker boxes of them, like, I would much rather use the crafter to set it up to do not just bricks, but bricks, stairs, walls, slabs, cracked, like all that kind of stuff, which you could in a large crafting array with the autocrafter. You could do it. Like you could have everything funnel into its own shulker box or boxes and just have it all ready to go. So rather than having to grab stone and quickly create stairs or stuff as you go, then you can go back and get the stuff. But sometimes it could also be a matter of inventory preference too, because it's the most efficient way for me is to carry a lot of stone. And if I need stone bricks or the subsequent sub blocks, then I just go stone to bricks, bricks to whatever I need. And then I only have to really carry a lot of stone around with me. But if I had a lot of everything, then I'd have to either constantly be returning to replenish my stock, or I'd have to have the inventory space for like stacks of each one of those things rather than crafting, 32 or half stack, whenever I needed them. So it's a delicate balance too. Like I feel like the outside of the crafting table recipes, they end up being things I don't work with very much. I work with a lot of concrete in the modern city, but that's because that's by design. And so I'm kind of suffering through the current method there. But when it comes to other stuff, like I don't even use lava for fuel, even though I know it's really good for it. I find the transportation and logistics behind that to be a pain in the butt, because it involves player interaction, right?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the kicker is like it's difficult to do stuff in bulk if it's not in the crafting table, because the crafting table is when you can interact with stuff a stack at a time, a lot of the time, depending on the recipe. But like if you want to make 8 stacks of concrete powder, you can do that. Whereas if you want to convert 8 stacks of concrete powder into concrete, then it's not as instantaneous. Like, it takes a lot longer. And believe me, as somebody who built a giant thing out of white concrete at the end of Minecraft SOS, It is a long process. I was AFKing that. Whereas if I wanted to craft stuff, it was a matter of gathering the resources, took the time. The crafting step to concrete powder took like 5 minutes, and I was done with like 15 double chests of the stuff. And so you've got to find some kind of way of either making it an individual thing, by which point you wouldn't want the crafter to be involved anyway, because you're not going to need to automate it if it's just one thing that you want to convert in a tactile way. Or you've got to find some mechanic that allows you to interact with that stuff a stack at a time if players are going to want it in bulk. And so that's, I think, the difficulty there. But I can see them keeping some of that stuff exclusive. You're not going to find crafting recipes that are only going to work in the crafting table but not work in the crafter. Like, I don't think that's a line they're going to draw. Like, if it works in one, it's going to work in the other. And like you said, the barrier to entry there is just working out how the redstone and the timing of adding the items is going to work for the crafter. But I do wonder if other little tactile mechanics are going to show up later. Even things like I said, like hardening mud into clay over a campfire, or brushing something with the brush in the archaeology settings to get like, something out of suspicious sand or gravel that we didn't get before even. Like, there are still mechanics like that encourage players to interact with the world, and then the crafter can be a later step in the process. I think it's a matter of considering what has synergy with the crafter as an idea, and allowing that to be the centerpiece of like a factory setup or whatever, without feeling like the agency in crafting is given over to the crafter in its entirety. And I would really love to see some more tactile crafting mechanics, but I can recognize that there are pitfalls in all of them.
How do you feel about the workstations, like getting into different workstations that would still give the players like an interface, as opposed to things like using water for concrete over the crafter? So it probably still involve player interaction, but it involves like a block.
Yeah, it's tricky because a lot of the time those things require GUIs, at least to give players a hint about how the mechanic itself works, right? Like, the tactile crafting stuff is something that you have to have signposted to you, because it's not available in a recipe book. And if it's in a recipe book, then it's in a GUI, right? And so I think that's one of the tricky ways. It's not even just about how accessible it is to the player as part of regular gameplay. It's about how do we teach players that mechanic to begin with. And so I think workstations are useful for that, but I see a move away from introducing more GUIs to this game. Like, I don't think there are many things. The smithing table was probably the most recent thing to get like a GUI update, but I think that's one of the reasons we don't have a fletching table UI is that, like, you know, what's it going to be used for? Like, how does that end up being significantly different from what we can already do in a crafting table, and just not finding solutions to that? And it may be that we end up with more workstations in future, but they have to bring a whole new set of mechanics with them to feel significantly different than the crafting system we've got already, and therefore to not require the crafter in the slightest. And I think it's a good thing that we can't automate things like the smithing table and the stone cutter, because those feel like player interactive things. Like, it feels like skilled labor is taking place there rather than it being something that can be automated by the crafter. And so any new workstations, I think, would have to capture that feeling of like you're using specialist tools for this instead of it being something that has to be done in bulk, you know?
I agree, and I think that it's a delicate balance. And Fwip brought this up a couple of weeks ago on the show about not wanting to spend more time in menus, wanting to spend more time playing the game, right? And I flip-flop on this because I think like there's could be more efficient ways to do certain things, but then also, for example, if you wanted cauldrons to interact with the crafter and hoppers, right? How do you do that? Like, you can take a furnace or a blast furnace and have them work like that. And that's fairly easy to figure out because we all know how to use a furnace. They have the small. It's a small UI. It's a UI I don't mind being in because it makes sense that you have to put something inside this block. That it has an inside. That's how things are crafted in it. But with cauldrons, like, you can see the inside of it. You can look into an empty cauldron, or you can look into a cauldron that's full of water, and it would be interesting to see if there would ever be any interaction between the cauldron and, say, the crafter, where the crafter might spit out the concrete powder, but if it spits it out into a filled cauldron, then it could turn it into concrete. And then maybe a hopper could pull it out. But then how do you do that visually that doesn't create a lot of lag, that has the efficiency that you want, and also, as you mentioned, how do you communicate that to a player? Like, how do you tell a player without a UI that this cauldron can change stuff? And, like, do you put a UI in the cauldron? That seems weird. I don't have a UI for my kitchen sink. I just kind of know how it works, right? It's a strange battle. It's like, so when I think about changing the UI, and when I thought about like interacting with hoppers and the crafter and the workstations, I went and looked up the workstations. A lot of the workstations already are capable of interacting with. You know, like, you've got your smoker, your furnace, your blast furnace. You've got a couple of other things that are brewing stands work with hoppers. Like, they might not work with the crafter, but they certainly work with hoppers. Barrels, there's a few of them that really line up. And then the ones that don't, like the fletching table, it doesn't have any function at all. So, you know, like, it's hard to figure out what it could be used for, you know?
Yeah, there's certainly a little bit of wiggle room for that stuff, but I'm really curious to see how the crafter affects, for want of a better word, the meta of recipes and how crafting is interacted with in future. So maybe that stuff we'll see even in a 1.21.1 update, or like in future quality of life updates. So we're going to see new crafting mechanics emerge as a response to the crafter. That's kind of something I'm interested in. So as always, I'd like to encourage anybody who's interested in emailing the show to send in your thoughts. If you want to continue this discussion, we'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, though, that's where we're going to leave this episode of The Spawn Chunks. Thank you so much for listening. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks to join our community. Pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You'll be just in time for the monthly Minecraft Hangout, which is happening this Saturday, and you'll also have a quarterly Hangout the following Saturday. You can also listen to the show live and watch us live in the Discord every time we do a recording of the show. We currently have 320 patrons, which is up one from 319 last week. Thank you so much for jumping on board. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons, Gundar H. Striker, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. New episodes are available on Mondays on all of the major podcasting platforms, and of course, returning to YouTube video now that Jonny is back. You can contact the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked at thespawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the Render Distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Jonny, but online I go by Pixel Riffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch. I'm back to doing that now that I'm back from my break, and I do behind-the-scenes work there for my YouTube series and play occasional other games from time to time. I'm also back as the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap. Thank you so much to Sloy for filling in for me while I was away. You can find that through a quick search on YouTube. Aside from that, I'm at Pixel Riffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Links to everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com. That includes the Citadel Cafe, my podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. I am heading out with my co-host Steven ESC tomorrow evening to see Deadpool and Wolverine, so we'll be talking about that on the show in the future. I'm Joel Duggan on social media, very easy to find, Joel Duggan on Twitch as well. I stream Wednesday through Saturday for the summer. I'm taking Sundays off, and on Fridays, I work on Lego live on stream, which also happens to be from the Citadel. I'm working on a MOC, my own creation designed by Grandpa Crafter, which is the Westo front gate. It's very cool. Rest of the time, obviously, I'm in Minecraft working on Westo.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, and you can't craft infinity.